As we think about the work for us in this space, I do see the lines between technology and really everybody else is going to have to start blurring. And I also think some of the AI and other capabilities are going to improve that, bring closer together. Because I know I have seen, in some ways, even more of a confrontational approach between operations and tech teams. But I think the reality is we have that opportunity to bridge that gap at a greater level. But part of it takes us learning a little more, learning more of the language from an operations perspective of what the technologists are using and the database, how things are able to be used as well. All right, so ready for our next session? We got a fireside chat. Deanna Stacy's coming up, principal and founder for Blue Umbrella Services, which used to be Red Umbrella, right? Okay. So we're going to talk a little bit about from Touchpoint to transformation and driving CX excellence through digital-first contact center strategies. So welcome to the stage.
Thank you.
So maybe I know we kind of gave your name, but a little more of an introduction of yourself for the audience.
So Blue Umbrella Services is my own organization, my own company. I do consulting in CX and business transformation, but I was at Porter Airlines for 11 years. I actually started consulting in business transformation, project management, and then was at Porter for 11 years. At the end, I was the VP of Customer Experience and Delivery, but I owned the digital product teams. I, for 7 years, ran the loyalty program, all of the project management and transformation, and then the last 2 years, I ran the contact center. So by no means am I a contact center expert, I want to make that clear, but it was a huge learning for me, from transformation, understanding the passenger, the customer better as well.
Right. So we think about this digital first. I think digital first service hub. When we were preparing for this, you brought that up and talked about that being a kind of a win and something you were able to do. So talk a little more about what you were working on that, how that came about. I'd love to learn more.
Sure. So I think the digital first I'm talking about is a bit different from what I've heard today, in terms of making contact center completely digital first from really a team member perspective. Coming out of COVID, we were looking at how to better improve our service with our passengers and customers. And what a lot of companies did is they went digital first from a COVID perspective. We were looking at it knowing from our data that passengers wanted to self-serve. It was better for them if they were able to make changes to their reservation on their own, if they got the information they needed without having to contact the call center or to ask somebody at the airport. So that's what digital first was, and that was coming out of COVID. I should add, though, that we also, coming out of COVID, Porter purchased 80 jets, had a whole new fleet, was coming out of Pearson. So there was also this other transformation happening. In terms of the contact center, the digital first, and this is actually how I ended up at working with the contact center, is I was finding and doing the digital first, what was missing for me is not having a frontline team group that was working every day with the passengers, so I could understand their needs. I had the data, but really working with the team members that were interacting with them daily, and also working with those teams so I could better influence how they educated the passenger around digital first.
And so that obviously brought in the human connection to the digital initiative from that perspective. So growth can create challenges, right? And obviously you just talked about major kind of transformation growth at the organization. So when you look at that, and it can often have trouble with workflows and things like that, but what kind of structures or operating routines matter most to kind of keep that quality high and still provide the scale needed?
So technology is obviously key, and I would say we did this growth and not having all the technology pieces in place, and it was just because with COVID and then purchasing the jets, we didn't have the time to have everything in place. But then there's other structures you could have kind of on top of the technology that ensures you do have that quality. The biggest thing I'd say is leadership. So we went from 80 to 300, close to 300 agents, partially because we didn't have all the technology. So we needed, as we grew, we needed to have agents because we went from less than 2 million passengers to 7 million passengers in about 2 years. With that volume of agents, we needed to make sure we were hiring the right people. As you're moving into supervisors, you had the right leadership and coaching. So that was very critical. The other piece, which we didn't get till near the end, and I think the manager, this is over there, is workforce management. I think that was a piece that was missing that the director and I kept pushing for. We couldn't get budget for, and then did at the end. When you have that volume of team, you need to understand, you need to have workforce management around it to get the proper and effective efficiency of that team. And those are the two really critical things, I believe.
Yeah, absolutely. So, you talked also about focusing on leadership in that context, right? Pull on that thread a little bit more.
So when you have that kind of volume of agents coming in, again, there's making sure you're getting the right people, but you're gonna have turnover, and then you need to have supervisors and leads that can effectively coach and manage them and understand what's going on with that team. We had some strong managers that really, we actually kind of talked about this, that they would focus on coaching, leadership, getting the supervisors to where they needed to be. The director who knew the ins and outs of the contact center was going to focus on workforce management, other areas of it. That kind of focus from the management level of getting the supervisors to where they needed to be was really effective. Because again, we went from 80 to almost 300, and a lot of that was in a year. So the airline industry is not easy to understand. There's a lot of regulations. It's very complicated. So you need to make sure that you have the teams in place to ensure that your agents are getting the right information. And the other piece I forgot to mention that was really critical is training. Because again, we had legacy systems, different regulations, so making sure that you've got the right training in place. And it was really critical for leadership to ensure that the right elements of training were there.
Okay. So I know we were talking a little bit about, on our prep call about metrics, whether it be, net promoter score, customer satisfaction, FCR, strategic levers that they really can become. So how do you use that and how did you use that to drive cross-functional alignment, without them being like blame tools or misused, if you will?
Yeah, so at Porter, they've had for years a frontline bonus program. And what was in order to do that, what they had is you had a metric for a company metric and then a team metric and targets for that, which wasn't as effective for the contact center. And the director at the time had great recommendation to do, which I think is very common in a lot of contact centers, is to take, and we decided to do a pilot of it, but to take the agent satisfaction score, the customer satisfaction of the agent, and instead of having a target, essentially, we took the top each quarter, the top agents for that score, and what we did is we ensured that they had the reporting every minute. They could see where they were on that level. There was coaching in terms of saying, okay, this person's has got 100%, and these are the things they're doing to get 100%. And what we found is it was a huge motivation to the team. It was very positive. It was a real culture shift for Porter, though, to get to that in terms of explaining to HR, explaining to leadership, we're not going to do a team metric. It's actually going to be individual against each other, so it sounds kind of negative, but the result was very positive, very positive.
What do you attribute that to?
Well, first of all, I think contact center is different than if you're working in an airport where you are working to complete a task. It's with multiple people. When you have a call with a customer, it's you on that call. So I think that they felt more close to the metric when it was measuring themselves. And then it was I think just the visibility of it it motivated them to work harder. And actually, it motivated them to work more as a team because people would go to say, hey, you got 100%. What are the things that you did to get you to that level? And so we found more cross-collaboration than we'd seen before as well.
It's kind of a culture. I mean, it was definitely more of a cultural component as well that brought that together.
Yeah.
We've talked a couple of times, you drop AI on something, it's like the old adage was garbage in, garbage out. I think these days with AI, it's garbage in, spotlight on your garbage. Using AI often, so as you think about that, it can cause more fragmentation. So how did you ensure that as you added or looked at the use cases of AI, that it actually added value and outcomes and didn't just maybe make things worse?
So I'm actually going to give a different story than what most people are saying here. I'm actually going to give a story of what didn't work, and
Okay.
we actually ended up terminating our AI vendor, and I'll talk through why. So when we started with Chatbot, this is 2022, so a while ago. At the time, we were so focused because we knew we were launching Jets that we didn't probably do, and I didn't do the focus that I probably should have. We just wanted a chatbot. I knew we couldn't focus beyond that, but the company convinced us, it was an AI company, convinced us to kind of go with them, do a chatbot, and then move into other elements of AI later on. So a couple things. I think we selected the wrong vendor. I think we weren't as focused on it because we were doing so many other things. So we weren't able to focus on, okay, what are we trying to solve here? What is our objective long term? And then I think the other thing we did is the structure became fairly fragmented. I think what we ended up adding a layer. We actually added more people to support it because when we did the chatbot, we had an agent to support, and it was such a high volume that was pushing out to the agent to support. We had longer wait times than our actual contact center. And so we were going to actually remove the agent and try and make the chatbot better, but we just also realized at that point that the vendor wasn't who they said they were going to be. And so I made the decision to cut bait and move away from it.
Yeah, the gentleman asked earlier that there's a lot of vendors saying,
Yeah.
promising and saying things. Any lessons learned from that of how to, test them more, I guess?
Yeah. We were talking about this earlier. I think, so I think part of it is if they're taking weeks to do a demo, that in itself is a problem. We had, even with this vendor, once we'd selected them, we were supposed to be doing an LLM at this point, and it was taking them weeks to answer certain questions that we could get in ChatGPT. And then when we started to explore new vendors, I was finding the same thing. They'd say, okay, well, we're going to come, but we need 3 weeks to bring a demo in. They shouldn't have to, they should be able to respond fairly quickly. I mean, some people here today were talking about, I think at Tangerine, it took 25 days to get up and going. So for through that sales process, I think that's important. The other thing is really understand who they've worked with before. And they will give references, but through your own contacts, find companies that have worked with them, and I really spend the time understanding the type of work and everything. I had some red flags that I saw, and they kind of talked them away, which I should have listened to myself. Yeah.
I think that's the key, right? Don't ignore some of those red flags, some of those pieces that may pop up during the conversation, and ask for those real use cases, and see it in action from that perspective. So, as you grew, obviously there's a lot of growth in that organization, but you've seen that. So when you look at specialty service teams, the need these days, I think I was even talking earlier about super agents versus specialized agents and things of that nature. Sometimes you need to go specialty. You need to go very specific, but it creates handoffs.
Yeah.
It can add a little bit of additional layers. How do you design, for that while still focusing on being as seamless as possible?
Yeah. I think when I left Porter, there were 6 different groups, and there are some very specialized groups. Agency, so travel agency, and how you do business with travel agents is very different than direct with the passenger, and partnerships. Porter had a partnership with Transat, a joint venture, and other partnerships as well. So those are 2 very specific areas. Generally, I would say it's ensuring that your IVR is set up properly so that you're going to the right specialty group. Also, it's knowledge. It's making sure, so if you've got your general contact center that's going to answer questions on agency partnership at level 1 questions, make sure they can answer those questions. Make sure they have the knowledge at their fingertips that they can look up. I'd also say there's a leadership component to it as well. One of the things we saw with agency team, and while I was at Porter, there was this back and forth. Agency would be within sales, it would be back in the contact center, it was half and half. So at one point, we'd have level 1 and 2 within the contact center, and then sales and agency had kind of higher level questions. And there was constant tension because the agency and sales team were frustrated because they felt the contact center didn't have the right knowledge. They were pushing questions to them, pushing calls to them that that they should have been able to answer. And then the contact center was frustrated because they didn't feel they were given the knowledge. And what we did is we combined the groups. We actually brought the team from sales and agency and put them in the contact center, the leadership of that group as well. They didn't love that at first because there was a perception that they didn't want to be in the contact center. They wanted to be in sales. When I left, which was a number of months after, you could see the difference. Part of it is they just really started to work together. But now the leads and supervisors that were in the sales team were sitting with that contact center so they could better provide that information so that they could better service the agency customers.
Yeah, I think the key is there's no absolutely right model.
No.
There's what's potentially right for an organization.
Yeah.
Because there's a lot of different dynamics that have to go into that,
Exactly.
as you just described.
Yeah.
Okay. So, if you had to give this group kind of a good 90-day plan of ways to really think about, this move forward from kind of touch point to transformation, what do they need to be thinking of in that context?
So I'm going to be the boring person here and say governance. And I realize that that's not what people want to hear, but I think when you and I talked about it before, it was, name one of those things. So I would start with governance. Obviously, you need, technology people. The reason why, and I see this particularly as an issue right now when I see what's happening with AI is, and I've heard it today, where companies are just like, well, we need AI. But they're not asking the basic questions. What's the objective? How are we going to measure success? How is this going to impact our people, and what does that mean? If you're trying to solve something that has multiple departments, how are we going to work together? Governance does force you to look at all those things. Now, I don't think you need large governance always. In fact, I try and be more nimble in governance. But I don't think you can move forward with any sort of transformation without having some governments in place to make sure you've answered those questions. I think that's quite critical.
Yeah. So I'm going to open up a little bit to questions here. Any questions for Deanna? So if you were to go back, start over.
Yeah.
In this context, obviously you talked about there are certain things you learned, there's certain things that what are the primary changes you would make for your next project that really kind of tackles this same challenge?
Well, I think for the contact center, it's having the technology in place. We were in this situation, it was nobody's fault. The change moved quickly in terms of where we're going with growth in jets and where we're going coming out of COVID. But I would have the technology in place, both to better manage. So we had an IVR system, and then eventually we had Calabrio. But better manage data, better manage customer data, CRM, and reduce the need to just hire more agents when you're growing the way we were growing. I think that's the biggest thing. I'd also, though I do this all the time, and I know to ask the right questions. So much was going on. I'd really be clear, what are we trying to solve? What's our objectives? And it's something I say all the time. What's the problem we're trying to solve? I think in that moment, particularly on the AI and the chatbot, there were so many other things going on that we were focused elsewhere. So it's making sure you have that structure in place. It's also how much change can the organization handle at one time? I think we asked those questions. Some of it, we bought jets. We couldn't stop that. But there might have been other things that we should have stopped so that you have the right focus. I think that's the other thing as well.
Yeah, that is so on point, and because I think that's speed can be one of the biggest problems.
Yeah.
If you have to, then you have to. But if you don't have to, don't try to go fast. Yeah. And I do think that's one of the things happening, especially in AI these days, is we want to deploy fast. And it's like, well, take longer time testing because again, you're gonna build it, you're gonna buy it, and if you're gonna buy it, testing, spend more time in that front because too often the failures just create rework anyway.
Yeah.
From that perspective as well.
Yeah.
So last chance. Any other questions for Deanna?
There's one over here, I think.
Oh, right up front.
Louis Philippe, I work in Pratt & Whitney, Canada. I'm curious to know what was the methodology or the approach to justify the investment. Did you do it in chunk, or how did you come up with the value realization and justification?
For the jets or for
No, for
AI?
investing and improving the tools for contact center.
Yeah. So we did. So for the digital first, we did do an ROI. And this is something I would say. This is something I was really harping on when I left Porter. I think one of the things that we weren't good at is then measuring along the way, right? So we had a very strong business case process that we went through. So within that digital first, we started an app, we had a kiosk, changes to the web, all of that. So we did a strong business case. What I don't think we did was measuring all along the way and that was, I think, a problem with a lot of our business cases, to say, okay, have we achieved this? And so there was an initial business case. We did do another business case when we added some additional tools on, but we didn't necessarily measure the in-between, if that makes sense.
Thank you for the question. Any more? All right. Well, Deanna, thank you so much. It was great information. Thank you.
Thank you.